quick and done on this trip. Figured, why not? Let's have some fun instead. We're at the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum, and we're gonna go ride some streetcars, see some history, and enjoy yourselves for the rest of the day. Yeah. Like,
watch out.
Step her.
Break.
No, step on the...
Oh, scary. They got pins too. They all start out.
Not much cooler in here than it is outside, but at least you're out of the sun. This building was completed in 2005 at a cost of around $2 million. This has about 30 cars in here. Most of these cars we do not operate for the public, although a number of them do operate. We bring them out a couple times a year, particularly when we have a parade of trolleys, which was a couple weekends ago, right before the 4th of July. Most of the cars in here need work, restoration. You'll see they're in various stages of restoration. Some of them are basket cases. Some of them not quite that bad. Okay. Shortly after we got this building built, we received a grant to put solar panels on the roof as an experiment. And I did mention that we are a nonprofit organization. We're made up of volunteers. People you see working here don't get paid. We have a total of 5 paid people on staff. Those are people that do administrative work, bookkeeping, scheduling of the people to work here. There's jobs that the volunteers don't want to do. Everything you see in here is we beg and we borrow. We try to get grants to pay for the work. And the work is done by volunteers on an as-available basis. Many people have full-time jobs. They can't devote the time, so they're down here when they can. Some of the people are retired. We can put a little more time in. Okay. So the solar panels on the roof was an experiment to see if we could generate some electricity. Well, we found out the first year the solar panels we saved almost $3,000 on our electric bill. Wow. You can imagine we're using a lot of electricity here. Cars run on 600 volts of direct current, which we purchased from West Penn Allegheny Power. We have 2 substations that take the high voltage, convert it to direct current, and step it down to the 600 volts. 600 volts, the positive is in the overhead wire. It's collected by the trolley pole, comes down through the pole into the car, through the controls to the motors, and eventually out the rails back to the substation. Now, streetcars, not necessarily powered by electricity. At one time, streetcars were powered by cable. They experimented with cable cars in Pittsburgh, but it wasn't that good. Ice and slush got in the cable way and it just didn't work. So they went back to using animals. We have here, the oldest car in our collection, dates that back to about 1870. The exact year we're not sure because there's no paperwork on the car. But it matches drawings and plans and photographs of cars built by the John Stevenson Car Company about that time. And many cities had cars of this type, and they were pulled by horses. Another issue was they pulled up to the mill gate where the steel mills let out. 150 guys standing there trying to get on these cars. It took forever to load them. Well, eventually they phased out these cars as trailers, and they came up with something a little different. The trailers started looking like this orange car. It's longer, carry a lot more people. You had to have 3 men if you had a 2-car train, because you needed the motorman and the conductor on the first car, but you only needed the conductor on the second car. This car was very low because it didn't have motors. You didn't have to worry about the size of the motors raising the floor. You also notice what they did. If you peek inside the cars, we go past, the floor slopes down to the center doors. The original cars that were built to be trailers of this design did not have a door at the end. You got in the center doors, conductor was right there, you paid your fare, you went and you sat down. And then you got off by the same doors. Well, about 1915, somebody came up with the idea of powering these cars. People at Pittsburgh Railways Company worked with Westinghouse Electric, which was supplying all the electrical equipment for the trolley lines. They developed a small compact motor that was powerful enough to power these cars. They couldn't pull a trailer that wasn't powered, but it could pull a heavy load up the hill if the car had a full complement of people in it. Put doors at the ends, and this became the mainstay of Pittsburgh's trolley operations from the early 20s up until probably during World War II. At one time, there was about 1,100 of these cars running around in Pittsburgh. If you were going to ride a streetcar in the late 30s, early 40s, chances are this is what you were going to ride. They had two varieties of these. They had single-ended cars like this one, has controls at one end, trolley pull at the back. These cars needed a loop, or they had to go around the block at the end of the line, because they could only go in one direction. They also had double-ended cars, pulls at both ends, controls at both ends. When the trolley got to the end of the line, the operator switched the pulls, took the handles for the controls from one end to the other, and he could go back where he came from. These cars lasted into the early 50s, probably about 1953. And they were replaced by the PCC cars, which I'll show you in a few minutes. Does anybody have any questions so far? No questions so far. Unfortunately, time doesn't allow to tell you about every car we have in here, otherwise we'd be here for a couple of hours. We do offer complete tours on the weekends here. They take several hours, and they take you by every car, show you the substation, also take you into the barns down at the other end, including the restoration barn. Ray, our operator, mentioned that there's a car in his car barn that follows him around. He's from Philadelphia. This is the car that follows him around. Okay? This car's from Philadelphia. PTC, Philadelphia Transportation Company. He belonged to a museum in Philadelphia, and this car was there. That museum went defunct. The car went into storage. We got the car from what was left of that organization. We've received grants from them to restore this car. This car is next on our list of cars to be restored. We're presently down in the restoration shop working on a car from West Penn Railways. It's the last remaining Cincinnati curbside car, last car of that design. It's going to be rolled out the spring of next year. When that car moves out of the restoration shop, this car is going in. And in a couple of years, if we have enough people to work on it, this car will be brought out. This car was built in the mid-20s, but it's been modernized. What happened was, in the late 30s, Philadelphia, as did other cities, including Pittsburgh, started getting more modern streamlined cars. They didn't have enough that they could completely convert to the newer cars, so they intermixed cars. There'd be a streamlined car, then one of these old cars, then a streamlined car. The problem was these cars couldn't keep up with the streamliners. They slowed everything down. So they brought these cars into the shop and they overhauled them. They put high-speed motors on them. They took the square-cut gears, which were very noisy, replaced them with herringbone gears, rubber floor mats, recessed lighting, and leather seats. Originally they had wooden floors, bare light bulbs hanging from the ceiling, and solid wooden seats. So all of that was made to go away. Now we do have a Philadelphia car that's in the original configuration. It's stored down. In fact, I think it's in the shop right now being worked on for maintenance. This car is going to be the modernized version. Now I mentioned streamlined cars. Well, this red car over here is a streamlined car. Pittsburgh at one time had 666 cars of the same design running around the streets. These cars were introduced in the late 30s. What happened was during the early 30s, the streetcar companies were losing business because people were buying automobiles. They didn't have to wait on the street corners in the rain or the snow. They could go whenever they wanted, wherever they wanted. So the people that ran the streetcar companies were they were in panic mode, okay? We have to do something to get ridership back. Because the cars were old, they were noisy, uncomfortable. We need a car that can be mass produced, just like the automobiles. A car that can be run on just about any system with some variations. So the heads of the street railway companies, presidents of them, formed a committee, and it was called the President's Conference Committee, PCC. So that's a PCC car. You'll hear that being mentioned, PCC. They came up with a car that had fast acceleration, fast, smooth braking, comfortable seats, recessed lighting. The operator had foot controls instead of the hand crank controller and the manually operated air brakes. These cars could keep up with the automobiles of that day. As I say, Pittsburgh had 666 of them. These cars ran in Pittsburgh, Chicago, Toronto, Canada, Boston, Washington, D.C., St. Louis. I could go on. But it was basically the same standard design of car. There were variations. If you needed it a little shorter, they could make it 4 feet shorter. They could make it 4 feet longer. They could make it wider because it was all modular construction. Any questions so far? Yes?
What about the orange one?
The orange car is from Johnstown. Johnstown was the smallest city in the United States to still have streetcars running in the 60s. And that's the last Johnstown car of this type. There's one more Johnstown car at the Rock Hill Furnace Trolley Museum in Orbisoni, PA, but it's a different design. This car is operable. It needs some work. It needs cleaned up. It needs painted. It still has the Johnstown dirt and grime covering the inside. So we kind of try to keep the doors closed. This PCC is a bad example because it was built at the beginning of World War II. And they used inferior materials because of the shortages in metal, whatever. So it's kind of rusting out. And we have other cars of this design, several of which have been restored, and a couple that we do operate on a regular basis. Follow me over this way. This is a private car from Toledo, Ohio. It's one of the few cars we have that's not from Pennsylvania. This was used by the president of the power company, which also operated the streetcar lines, as his private car to entertain guests. It has a restroom. It has a buffet. Restroom, very unusual. Built in 1906. People didn't have indoor plumbing, but yet this thing had a restroom. And the interior is presently being restored. It's nearing completion. However, if you look underneath the car, there's no motors, no electrical equipment. We have everything. But once the interior is completed, we're going to start working to power the car. In a couple of years, I'm sure it's going to be running. Come back and take a ride. I have a couple pieces of work equipment here. Most interesting cars are on the right. The yellow one is from Philadelphia. The maroon car is from Pittsburgh. They're snow sweeps. When the street railway companies got permission to put their track down the middle of the streets, town councils, city fathers, whatever, stipulated that the trolley companies are going to have to maintain the streets between the rails. Maybe a distance of anywhere from a foot to 2 feet outside the rails. And that included snow removal. So at first, they would use gangs of men to come out with snow shovels. That was very expensive, and it took forever. So about 1895, McGuire Cummings Company came up with the idea of building a mechanized machine for removing the snow. And it works very similar to snow blowers today. you have rotating brushes. These are made of bamboo. And we get the rods of bamboo, you cut them to length, you soak them in hot water, they become soft and bendable. They bend them around a yoke. Okay, you can still get these. Now, back when they used these would have to be replaced at least once each season. This car was restored in 2015, and we have used it to clear snow off. Not that we needed to clear the snow off, but it was fun. These cars were actually used into the 60s in Pittsburgh. And here's a picture of one in Castle Shannon on what is now the T-line. You have a big motor at each end inside the car. There's motors underneath that power the car. But the motors inside drive this bicycle chain affair, which spins the brush, and then these chains raise and lower the brush. The wings on the side here push the snow aside. This car is from Philadelphia. It was used on the Red Arrow lines out of 69th Street, out to Westchester, Media, Sharon Hill, the suburbs. It's a center entrance car to hold a lot of people. It's fast loading, but unfortunately it requires 2 men to operate, so they only use them during the rush hour. If you'll follow me, we're going to go out here and show you our newest acquisition. And be prepared. It's going to be so nice. This is the coolest spot down here. Oh, yeah. This is one of the few places down here that's actually air conditioned. This is the visitors. Okay. This is, as far as we know, the last remaining trolley station in the United States. Built in 1908 for the Harmony Short Line, or Pittsburgh, Harmony, Butler, Newcastle Railway, which was a trolley line that ran from downtown Pittsburgh up to Newcastle, a line going to Butler, another line going over to Beaver. Ran through the hills and woods, North Hills. This station was located in Wexford, along Route 910, which is between Interstate 79 and Perry Highway. They had several stations along their right of way. When this building was built, there were 3 sections. There were walls where these beams are. That was the office. The middle was the waiting room. This was the freight station because they hauled freight. Not huge freight, but packages. You lived out on a farm out in the middle of nowhere, and all you had were rutted dirt roads to take you wherever you needed to go, and your tractor broke down. You got your Sears Roebuck catalog out. You went to your telephone, like that one, you turned the crank, you got the operator, she connected you with Sears Roebuck, you ordered your part. The part came from Sears, which was in Chicago, on a train to Pittsburgh. They took it off the train, they loaded it onto a trolley car. The trolley car brought it to your farm. There you got your part. It's kind of like UPS, an early version. Well, when the trolley line shut down in 1931, the gentleman that was the station master here purchased the building, bought the property. He moved it about 1.5 miles up Route 910 to the intersection of Perry Highway, where he had a piece of property. He set it there on a foundation. It became the post office for Wexford, okay, for many years. Eventually, the post office moved to a new building. It was a craft store, it was an antique store. Eventually, it became a delicatessen. Had terrific corned beef sandwiches. The owners still, the original owners of the building still kept title to it. Okay? They leased it to these occupants. The owners of the delicatessen retired in 2014, moved to Florida. The building was empty. The granddaughter of the original station master. She was getting up there in age. She knew the building was of historical significance. She contacted the Trolley Museum. She wanted to know if we were interested. Of course we were. However, as is rare, you can have it. Now you have to understand, the building was sitting on a piece of prime real estate because Wexford had developed and they basically wanted to get rid of it. So if we wouldn't have taken it, I'm sure the building would have been. So we mounted a fundraising campaign. Raised enough money within a year. In 2015, we took this building apart in 3 sections and we moved it down here by truck. Put it on the foundation. Now it has a basement where we store parts for the overhead wire. We also air condition it and have a furnace. Now, somewhere down the road, this area that we're in here is going to become the main part of the museum. Where you went to park your car in the visitor center, that's going to become offices and maintenance shops. Okay? There'll be a huge parking lot out here with a road going up the main street. We already have the easement for the road. The track is going to be extended 2 tracks behind this building. It's going to be paved with cobblestones and it's going to become Main Street, Trolley Street. We're going to have buildings over here, the visitor center, the gift shop, exhibits. We're going to have meeting rooms, possibly even a snack bar down here. So this is where you'll come, you'll board the trolley. They're hoping 2020. We'll see. I'm not sure. A lot of the funding is in place. Again, we're begging and we're borrowing and we're trying to do the best we can. So, any questions? No questions. Okay, back to the trolley. We'll walk around in front of the building. People that started this organization, which was called the Pittsburgh Electric Club, brought 3 cars down here under their own power before they shut the power off and cut the wires. They purchased 2,000 feet of track coming down this way from where you boarded the car. That was the beginning of the Trolley Museum. They built the 1-car house in the area near where you boarded. We actually opened up in 1964, I believe.
Wow.
And we've been adding on ever since.
Wonderful. It was a kit built by the J.G. Brill Company in Philadelphia, sent to South America, to Rio de Janeiro.
Wow.
They assembled the car down there using electrical parts from Pittsburgh here, Westinghouse Electric. It was just metal parts and electrical parts that were sent down. All the wood was locally sourced around Rio de Janeiro. The wood is all teak. And teak is a good wood for using when it's exposed to weather because it's impervious to moisture, rain, whatever. Car ran to the early 60s in Rio de Janeiro. It was purchased by a gentleman in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania, a fellow by the name of Ed Blossom, who had a private collection of trolley cars and a little museum up there in the eastern part of Pennsylvania. He restored the car. Hurricane Agnes came in 1972, wiped his little operation out. This car was up to the roof in water. That was the end of his museum. Several years later, he died. The car ended up going to a warehouse in Philadelphia, sat there for years. People would come down here and visit us, and they were disappointed that we didn't have an open car because they remember riding these cars to the amusement parks, whatever. This was in the late 60s, early 70s. So we heard an opportunity to purchase this car. It was an auction. We bid on it. We were the successful bidders. We brought it here. We had to change the gauge of the wheels so it fits on our track. The car had to be completely rebuilt again. And here it is.
But I mean, this is like original. Is this that wood?
This is teak. Yes, that's the original wood
From
from South America.
Oh, wow.
Brazil. Yeah. But this was typical of the open cars that ran in many cities, Pittsburgh included. It's not quite the same design, but it gives you the experience of riding an open car, which they were very popular, you know, in the late teens, 20s. And then, of course, people became safety conscious.
Right.
Plus the fact that you couldn't run these all year round. You had to be careful of the weather. So, yeah.
It's an incredible ride. I highly recommend it.
back, visit us again.